Let's get peppy. It's time to pep. I'm turned to a verb. I'm experimenting. Okay, don't pull me down to earth.
Okay.
I'm flying I'm like Icarus, flying towards the sun.
Right.
I'm Chaz Licciardello. I am I was going to say co-host. Bugger it. I'm carrying John Barron. I am the host of Planet America. No.
Wow.
I'm the co-host.
Chaz has just launched a coup in Planet America an auxiliary podcast.
I'm still flying towards the sun.
Okay.
Icarus-like. I'm the co-host of a show called Planet America, which is on the ABC. I never explain this to people who actually listen to this podcast but don't watch our show.
Okay.
Our show's on Friday nights at 8 o'clock,
example.
exactly
Yes.
like you. And this is, for all the stuff that we can't cram into the show on Fridays, we cram into this podcast. This is Dr. Dave Smith. Tell us who you are, Dr. Dave Smith.
I am an associate professor at the University of Sydney, based at the US Studies Centre and the Department of Government and International Relations.
There you go. Now, for those who say that I'm so unprofessional, I never introduce this properly, now you know why. That was really boring. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about me as well. I'm talking about this whole intro thing. Let's never do that again.
Okay.
But how many times have I said on this podcast that we are more powerful than Mark Zuckerberg? Countless times.
Yeah.
Countless
so
times.
many times that I can't even remember any of them. But it is worth noting we are now the only source of news that Facebook is allowing in Australia.
We've got to squeeze the whole world's news for Australia into this hour and a half.
Although I feel Facebook is just possibly sending us the message, you are not news. Which is... I suppose, yeah.
It's because we're better than news.
I don't know. Well,
we're a way of life.
I suppose I think we are news to a certain extent. Like, I doubt that many people found out the Super Bowl result from us. But I think
Jeez, I hope they didn't.
I think a lot of people
disappointed with our
found out
coverage.
about Oklahoma's Bigfoot hunting season from us.
I found out about that.
You wouldn't have
from us.
known that otherwise.
Exactly. So we are news. But look, our Facebook page, for those who don't believe me when I say that the ABC Planet America Facebook page is not Planet America's Facebook page. It's
Yes.
my personal page.
Yes.
I just call ABC Planet America. There is the proof. We're the only ABC page that's still going because we have nothing to do with the ABC. So there you go. So
I
now,
don't know if this introduction is actually making anything clearer to anyone.
But what is going on with this story?
Okay, so we're going to
this
take
is
a
about Australia.
rare foray
And so
into Australia.
I don't understand it. So you
Here.
have to
And
explain
for
to me.
our overseas listeners, so this is what we are talking about. Australia's House of Representatives recently passed legislation which would make both Google and Facebook actually pay for to license content
We're talking
from news producers in Australia.
Is this for links?
Yes.
So they're asking Facebook to pay to link to, say, Channel 9's
Well,
website.
okay, so
Because that makes no sense.
this
That's
is
promotion.
Yeah, so that's exactly what Facebook's argument is. I'm not going to get into the rights and wrongs
such a
of it.
cyborg.
So Google for a few weeks was actually threatening to stop its search engine in Australia, which would have been a considerably bigger deal than Facebook.
So what? I just use Bing.
Cutting off. No one uses Bing. No, Microsoft tries to make you use Bing.
Not even Steve Bing uses Bing.
So, but Google actually, though, acknowledges that, yes, without the consent of news organisations, Google makes a lot of money out of news content. So Google has actually reached agreements with major Australian media organisations. Facebook says, no, we are very different. News organisations use our platform to push their news out there.
Which is absolutely true.
Facebook has said, look, in this arrangement, they're the ones who are benefiting.
I am telling you, as someone who's inside the ABC,
Yeah.
they desperately use Facebook at every possible opportunity.
Well, this is one of the reasons why media organisations are so upset at the moment. Like the Conversation, which I write for, was blasting out emails last night about how bad this situation was. And it does make me wonder whether the government's going to try to cut a deal with them before the Senate actually votes on the legislation in a few days' time. Another sort of dimension to this is News Corp lobbied very heavily for this legislation. In some ways, this is a fight between Facebook and News Corp that has been brewing for a long time. But another thing to keep in mind is this is not just about Australia. Australia is not the only place where this kind of legislation has been proposed. The European Union could have something similar on the agenda. So given that we're still in the Lunar New Year, it's worth mentioning a Chinese saying, kill the chicken to scare the monkeys.
We're the chicken?
We are a very inexpensive chicken
that's nice.
That is being used to send a message to some of the world's biggest monkeys.
It's nice that we're not considered monkeys. I don't understand why the Chinese proverb is so crash out on monkeys. I would have thought the chicken would be higher than the monkeys.
Chickens
are
it
more
derives from a folk tale.
Monkeys just fling shit.
It derives from a folk tale about someone who had a dancing monkey.
Okay.
And then one day the monkey stopped dancing. And so rather than kill the monkey, which is the source of income, they killed a chicken in front of the monkey and the monkey started dancing.
The monkey can dance all it likes. I'm still taking the chicken. Sorry, monkey.
Wow.
That's okay. We probably shouldn't talk more about this, otherwise we are going to get banned. And this is American politics podcast, so let's get into that.
Yes.
Now, on the show, since we do cover stuff on the show that we don't cover in this podcast, I can tell you that one of the things we talked a little bit about we spoke at length about impeachment. We've covered that all right.
Yes.
We also spoke a bit about the incipient civil war between the Republican Party, between Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump, which is now pretty much out in the open because it's not just It's not just Donald Trump sledging Mitch McConnell. He sledges everyone. If that was a war, there'd be a lot of wars going on.
Yes.
But Mitch McConnell is now fighting back. He's explicitly saying, I'm going to potentially interfere in primaries.
Yes.
Not to get rid of Trumpists, he assures us, but just to make sure that the candidate is electable.
Yes.
So now we spoke about this for a while, so I was just wondering if you have any thoughts about where the Republicans are going before we move on.
Well, first of all, a split in the party is highly unlikely. And I can't remember whether we talked about this on Monday. But in the last few weeks, if we look at the Republican Party as currently having a pro-Trump side and an anti-Trump side, and the pro-Trump side is a lot bigger, just in terms of the sheer number of people associated with it, than the anti-Trump side. But the anti-Trump side is quite significantly represented among senators, media figures, donors. It's what used to be referred to as the party establishment or the party elite, although when you look at the kind of pro-Trump control of basically every lever of power within the Republican Party, from local party organisations all the way to the RNC, I don't think it's really possible to call the anti-Trump wing the establishment anymore.
If we take the polls from the impeachment as some kind of indication, like people saying Trump was at fault, Trump should be impeached, etc., who are in the Republican Party, generally speaking, the numbers were between 21 and 28% of Republicans were against Trump.
Right.
It seemed.
Right, So we're talking about a very uneven conflict, but nonetheless, the anti-Trump side has quite a lot of resources because of the way that it's entrenched in mainstream politics. So over the last few weeks, there were threats from both sides to split. When there was still kind of the possibility being floated, maybe they'll get enough Republican votes for impeachment, Trump was letting slip, I could start a new Patriot Party.
Good luck.
Yeah. Now, I think everyone correctly understood it as that was just a threat to blow up the Republican Party. I mean, we've talked about this before. Trump just does not give a shit about the Republican Party. He actually would be prepared, out of spite, to start some new political entity which would achieve nothing except making it impossible for Republicans to get elected. On the other hand, there was this Zoom meeting. More than 100 anti-Trump Republicans supposedly talking about a new and independent Conservative Party.
We're talking about an entire party with 100 people.
Now, both of these threats evaporated very, very quickly. And there are some very well-known reasons why you just would never expect an actual split like this to take place, which is, first of all, the American electoral system is very, very unforgiving to would-be third parties. Every single part of the American electoral system is winner takes all from top to bottom.
Even to get ballot access is very hard.
Absolutely.
The Libertarians have been around forever.
Yes.
We all know them. They are lucky to get on a quarter of ballots.
Absolutely.
In House elections.
Yes. Yeah. So it's very hard to get on ballots in the first place because of rules that are made by the major parties. And then once you do, you are going to have nothing to show for it. There's no kind of proportional representation anywhere. There are experiments going on with ranked choice voting in places like Maine, potentially. But it's not like the Australian system where third parties can gradually build up their power in the states and in the Senate through proportional representation in the upper house. There is none of that. A party, even if a third party could get 10% of the vote in the United States, that would leave it with 10% of nothing when it comes to representation, unless supporters happen to be concentrated enough somewhere where they can win a seat.
Just to flesh that out a little bit, we spoke to someone from the Lincoln Project last year, and they were saying their aim, as far as Republicans go, was to take 4% of the Republicans vote away.
Yes.
And he said, if we take 4% of the Republican vote away, that's enough for them to lose the
Absolutely
election.
right. This brings us to what can third parties do? They can spoil. Okay, so Democrats, as I'm sure probably most of our audience of hardcore politics junkies knows, but if you are newer to this and if you don't remember the 2000 election, what happened in 2000 was it came down to one state, Florida. It came down to just over 500 votes in Florida, which George W. Bush eventually won the state, perhaps because of intervention from the Supreme Court. But Ralph Nader, who was the Green Party candidate, got 10,000 votes in that state. And those are votes that probably would have gone to Al Gore. At least some of them would have gone, at least 500 of them would have gone to Al Gore if he hadn't been in the race. So, and I think that event really put this increased stigma on third parties as spoilers, which then got resurrected again in 2016 because there were places where the Greens did, got more votes than the margin between Trump and Clinton in some key states. So basically, running a third party, if you ever want to be anywhere near power, is a losing option. And both the would-be Patriot Party and the would-be Alternative Conservative Party, these are people who like being near power. Hans Knoll had a really good article in The Atlantic about this, which we probably can't link to because it's actual news. Hans Knoll's a great party expert, and he pointed out, you're just better off, even if you feel alienated from your own party, you are better off staying and fighting for power than you are starting a third party. I think I actually mentioned that last week, but always happy to plug Hans.
We are going to try to link that in the blurb as part of the homework.
Yes.
Have a look. It might not work, but if you look in the blurb of the Facebook or of the YouTube, look in the description, there will be homework there. Plus, Dr. Dave's entire reading list, which I never, ever, ever promote. But it's time I did because it's very long.
It is very long.
So anyway, have a look at the Hans Knoll article.
Maybe we should trim it a bit. But yeah, so certainly when we say civil war, we don't mean that the party is actually going to split. These party coalitions...
You don't mean Marjorie Taylor Greene will punch in the face Ted Cruz?
I mean, that could happen, but it's not going to cause a split in the party. That's that's just going to cause the greatest YouTube video of all time. These party coalitions are incredibly durable, right? So it's been more than 160 years since divisions over slavery actually just completely destroyed major parties. So the Whigs in the 1840s and then the Know-Nothings in the 1850s. The Democrats and Republicans have been through incredible social change. You've seen parties' positions shift remarkably on things, and the parties have still held together. There have been moments of split. The Republicans split in 1912 between conservatives and progressives. Democrats went through a lot of ruptures over civil rights stuff. You had Southern Democrats leaving the party, coming back in some cases, joining the Republicans in other cases. But then you actually got to this position where Republicans and Democrats effectively switched sides on race. That is, there's always just more incentive to stay within that party structure, even if the party actually hates you. On
that note, something which we talked about last year a fair bit was the incipient civil war on the left.
Yes.
And and at the time, I remember talking about saying that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is different to a lot of the people that she's compared to. One of the reasons is because she understands how politics works. She's clearly a savvy player.
Yes.
And what we're not seeing at all on the left at the moment is protest from anyone of any import on the far left about Joe Biden not been so far left.
That's true.
They understand this. This is the dog that's not barking.
That's
In fact,
true.
We're going to talk about the student loan situation slightly later on.
Yes, yeah.
That's the first time that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has even complained.
Yes.
And she did it in a very tamped down way.
That's right, yeah.
Because she knows exactly what you just said.
Yeah. No, apart from those wacky anarchists in Portland who burnt down the Democratic Party headquarters on the first night of the Biden administration, which that's almost like a psyop. As if to say, oh no, these anarchists have nothing to do with the Democratic Party. So basically, they are stuck with each other. Whatever happens, some equilibrium is going to be reached between them.
On that note, I couldn't help noticing, we were talking about Lindsey Graham just last podcast.
Yes.
You were talking about how he was pumping up Lara Trump for some reason.
Yes.
As part of his pathetic
The future of the party, in his words.
I feel sometimes that Lindsey Graham is the embodiment of that film cliche of the guy holding a ghetto blaster outside the window trying to attract Donald Trump's attention. Love me. It was a bit of that. But then we saw yesterday, maybe a bit of crazy like a fox from Lindsey Graham, which was that people keep on expecting, when's the smart Lindsey Graham going to come back? Because he used to be a smart guy. I don't know if this is it, but this was a different complexion to Lindsey.
Yeah.
Quote, I want you to know this. Mitch McConnell was indispensable to Donald Trump's success. Mitch McConnell got the tax cut through with a 2-vote Republican majority. Mitch McConnell was much to credit for Amy Coney Barrett as any single person. Mitch McConnell, working with Donald Trump, did a hell of a job. They are now at each other's throat. I'm more worried about 2022 than I've ever been. I don't want to eat our own. President Trump is the most consequential Republican in the party. If Mitch McConnell doesn't understand that, he's missing a lot. My question is this all Lindsey Graham trying to build up to a situation where he's the peacemaker of the Republican Party?
Oh, probably.
Do you think it would work?
Look, Lindsey Graham will do anything to get his head on television.
Ghetto blaster.
Yeah, I mean, and yes, I mean, getting Trump's attention is one thing. But he is, he's got thwarted presidential ambitions of his own, which he knows are never going to come true.
That's definitely never going to come true. There's no doubt about that.
So, he's always looking for a role for himself in the party. He got this sort of surprising role as
Trump's golf caddy.
Yeah. Trump's golf caddy and the guy who wipes his ass on Air Force One. He's going to keep striving for relevance.
Okay, let me throw one other scenario to you.
Yes.
Which is, this is actually a scenario brought up by Matt Gaetz of all people. And I have a general rule to never take for granted anything, to never take seriously anything Matt Gaetz has to say. But, quote, what Ron DeSantis didn't say, which is the truth, is that the Biden folks know that if Donald Trump is not the candidate in 2024, the leader of our movement will be Ron DeSantis. And
what?
Matt Gaetz thinks that Ron DeSantis is the heir apparent for Donald Trump. That's what he thinks. And I'm not sure if I mentioned on a podcast with you, but I have mentioned it earlier on that when we spoke to Sam Nunberg a few months back, and I asked him about Josh Hawley and so forth because I'm obsessed with him, and Tom Cotton. Yeah. He said, "No, forget them. No one likes them." In the Republican Party, he said, if there's going to be someone who's not discussed at the moment, it's going to be Ron DeSantis. That's what he said then. At the time when he said that, I thought to myself, that actually makes sense because Ron DeSantis he's a smart guy. He's not an idiot. But at the same time, and so he can mix with what you call the establishment wing. But at the same time, his Trumpist bona fides are right up there. He's definitely the thing he does best is culture war. He's all about culture war. He understands policy, but his front foot is always culture war. And just this week, you have a look. This is what he's done just in 1 week, okay? In 1 week, he proposed a bill to fine tech companies $100,000 a day if they deplatform a candidate for elective office in Florida. How good's that? That combines the two things that the Conservatives most like, which is complaining about deplatforming and complaining about COVID hypocrisy. Sorry. No, actually, that's the next thing. I jumped ahead of myself, which is he then started talking about illegal immigrants with COVID hypocrisy.
Yes.
Which I'll just play this clip.
So he's opening the border. He's letting illegals pour in. They're not doing any COVID tests. They're just coming into the communities. We have no idea what type of COVID or other things that may be carrying, but yet he wants to potentially make you take a test if you just get on an airplane and fly from one American city to the next, or he wants to prevent travel to the state of Florida. This stinks to high heaven.
How about that? Combining illegal immigration fear with he makes you do COVID tests, but he doesn't make them do COVID tests.
Yeah.
Then he also, on top of all that, he has been going on about how Florida schools never closed down.
Yes.
And yet their numbers are comparable to every other place where the schools have been closing down, which is obviously stewing as a big issue on the right. So he's gone 3 hot button right issues all in 1 week.
Well, you're also missing his press conference after the Super Bowl.
Oh, tell me about that.
So in Tampa, there were a lot of maskless celebrations following the Super Bowl. This is the first time in history that a team has won the Super Bowl in their own hometown. And, appropriately enough, there was a boat parade. There was footage of
course there was.
Tom Brady actually tossing the Vince Lombardi trophy to his tight end, Rob Gronkowski, across the water. No one's wearing masks or anything. And DeSantis was asked about this. And, I mean, you're absolutely right about his culture war instincts. He says this journalist, you only care about this when it's people that you don't like. You don't care about masklessness when it's so-called peaceful protests. By the way, so-called peaceful protest is right-wing code for black. You don't care about it when it's a Joe Biden celebration, but when it's football fans, is well, I'm a Bucks fan and I'm damn proud of what they did yesterday. And his whatever losers were standing around him started clapping and cheering. He has got those instincts, and I think that you might be right. Maybe he is of all of those potential people, rather than Hawley and Cotton, who've kind of already poisoned the well. But even the fact that we're even discussing that just shows you how great the gulf between Trump and any other would-be Trump
That's true.
is.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump was a national figure. He was a celebrity. He was someone who had managed to successfully create this mythology about embodying America even before he came anywhere near a political career. Ron DeSantis, on the other hand, is Florida man, right? If anyone's ever seen him, he's whining about Florida being mistreated by the national media. Now, I mean, that does play well in Florida. I think it will play well in the future of the Republican Party, where Florida is going to become this increasingly kind of totemic place. I think by the next election, it could be clear that Florida is safer Republican territory than Texas is. It's good, the future of the Republican Party is essentially the Florida-Ohio alliance. But, and so, yes, that might position him well within the Republican. But man, you think of the gulf between that and what Trump actually was.
Yeah.
And I've been making this point non-stop, and in this article in The Conversation that came out today, which no one is going to read because it can't be promoted on Facebook.
We're going to try and put in the homework as well.
Yes.
We'll try.
I've made that point again, which is that it's just very, very hard for a career politician to pick up the mantle of Trump, because part of Trump's whole appeal was he was so different from any politician. No politician can actually do a credible impersonation of Trump.
Well, let's talk about a guy who was as big as Trump,
Yes.
but he's dead.
Yes.
Rush Limbaugh.
Rush Limbaugh.
Take it away. I actually know less about Rush Limbaugh than most, so
Rush,
go for it.
I think that people are aware of Rush Limbaugh being a highly consequential figure in the American media landscape. And I suppose what I would say is, however consequential you think he was probably more consequential than that. Like, he's probably even more consequential than I thought he was. Rush Limbaugh, in many ways, created the right-wing media as we understand it today. Okay, so he came along at this absolutely key moment, which was the abolition of the FCC fairness doctrine in 1987. So the fairness doctrine had been this rule that on any politically controversial issue, broadcasters, whether radio stations or TV stations, had to give equal airing to both sides. Now, the one time I ever heard Rush Limbaugh, just listening to him on the radio while in a car going through Ohio, he was actually talking about the fairness doctrine because he was claiming that Democrats had plans to bring it back, which of course they never did.
If anyone, Republicans want to bring it back now.
They probably want to, bring it back now. But, so this was abolished during the Reagan era, and Limbaugh was saying, he said, radio, it just used to be so boring during the fairness doctrine. He said, because they couldn't talk about politics. So he said it was all just stories about lost dogs and things like that. That was current affairs. So Limbaugh's, he realised that he could make politics far more of a source of entertainment to a lot of people, but also just far more of an emotional, visceral blood sport. And it's always important to emphasise that both sides of Limbaugh were always there. They were intertwined with each other, the entertainment aspect and the blood sport, because what we're going to see in all the obituaries that are going to come out is the entertainment aspect is really going to be emphasised. One of the things that Limbaugh did, so this is a guy who came from sort of local royalty in Missouri. He came from a long line of judicial figures in Missouri. I was actually shocked when I was doing my PhD research, looking at affidavits made by Jehovah's Witnesses who had got beaten up in the streets of Midwestern cities in the 1940s, that this guy Rush Limbaugh gets mentioned. A judge, Rush Limbaugh's grandfather, a judge in Missouri. I think his father was also a judge, and his family, I think, wanted him to follow in the footsteps, but he was just intrigued by radio from
Limbaugh was more kind of judge.
From a very young age. But anyway, Limbaugh was always very comfortable moving in elite circles, and he would pretend that he was somehow different from the rest of the elites. But he was a celebrity. He moved in celebrity circles. He would get Elton John to come in and perform at his third wedding. And American celebrity circles being what they are, he was always welcomed in them because he was famous and because other entertainers respected his skill as an entertainer. They respected the fact that he had made politics a form of entertainment. But the really sinister thing about Limbaugh's influence was that reputation as an entertainer shielded him from really any reckoning with the massive amount of damage that he was doing. While he was convincing other elites that really politics is just this entertaining game, which I play very well, his audience took him incredibly seriously, right? So while, other highly educated, influential people might have found it funny that Limbaugh was using terms like feminazi, what a lot of his audience heard was literally feminists are Nazis, right? Literally, this country is under threat from these. Literally, you are under threat from these forces. So you'll hear a lot of reminiscences about, that Rush Limbaugh, he was always entertaining. What you won't hear so much about is the way that he radicalized people. Right? I've got a close friend with a father in North Carolina who she just does not speak to anymore after he spent more than a decade being radicalized by Limbaugh. And he wasn't listening to Limbaugh for the entertainment value. Maybe that was how it started. He was listening to Limbaugh because he believed only Limbaugh was telling him the truth about the imminent threats that the country was facing, which had to be responded to with violence. My friend is not alone in this. It's not very hard to find stories about people who became completely alienated and separated from their own families because they would spend 3 hours a day getting radicalized by Limbaugh, where the basic message that they heard is that your enemies are in charge of the country, right? Your enemies are in charge of everything, and your enemies are, they're always about to make their final catastrophic move. And in that way, he really was the template for right-wing media. So Limbaugh's doing all of this before Fox News comes along in 1996. By the time Fox News came along, Limbaugh was constantly being honoured by the Republican Party. And there was one analysis from Nicole Hemmer, who's a really good historian of right-wing media, and she points out that since the 1940s and 50s, there had been publishers who had tried to create this new alternative right-wing media always based on this model of telling their audience that you can't trust anyone except us. But she said Limbaugh just had such a bigger audience than anyone else. It was Limbaugh who, in the 90s, managed to fulfill what right-wing magnates have been trying to do for 40 or 50 years in terms of creating an alternative media. And he supported Pat Buchanan in 1992 in the Republican primaries. And Pat Buchanan did unexpectedly well. And this mythology took hold within the establishment of the Republican Party, within the George H.W. Bush wing, that Limbaugh was really influential. Now, this turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It meant over the next few years, because Limbaugh was the most popular conservative celebrity in the country, they believed he had all of this power. Now, it's true he had a lot of power over millions of people who listened to him. It didn't mean that he was broadly politically influential. This is like Alan Jones in Australia. The power is partly because powerful people believe in this mythical sway that he had over voters, which was always smaller just in sheer numerical terms than they believed, but was very, very intense for the people that he did have sway over. So in 1994, crazily, Limbaugh was credited with the Republican takeover of Congress, which was not the case at all. But nonetheless, by this point, Limbaugh was seen as being enormously powerful, even with then massive Republican defeat in 1996, where Limbaugh himself famously said the day after, maybe there are fewer of us than I thought. Nonetheless, that just did not damage this belief in Limbaugh's power. Another thing to keep in mind about Limbaugh is he mocked people with AIDS when that was considered a lot more acceptable than it is now. In 2008, he would play a parody song called Barack the Magic Negro, something you can't imagine even some of the furthest right people in American politics doing now. And this is a reminder of the fact that the right can complain about political correctness and wokeness all they want. The reality is that today's crazy political correctness and wokeness is tomorrow's widely accepted view about what it's polite, what it's decent, how it's proper to treat other human beings. Limbaugh just, all the way to the end, he was always at that most kind of indecent edge. Right the way to the end, he was saying there's no way that Joe Biden won this election, which, once again, at the moment, that's kind of orthodoxy within the Republican Party. In a few years' time, it's not going to be. In a few decades' time, no, it's going to be seen as this insane delusion. So Rush was always on the wrong side of history when it came to these issues. But this is one of the things that Republicans loved about him.
I've got a few things to jump in with here. Firstly, I just a little addition to the PC thing. I reckon with inverted commas PC or wokeness or whatever, I agree that wokeness is just another, or PC, political correctness is just another phrase for being considerate.
Yes.
But having said that, I wouldn't say that necessarily it's all going to be accommodated in 10 or 15 years time. I would say that there are many attempts from various people to be considerate of other people's feelings and polite. Some of them take, some of them don't take.
Yeah.
And the ones that take are there, become norm in 10 years. But, we don't call, I remember back in, it probably wasn't even real, but back in 25 years ago or 30 years ago, the cliche of talking about political correctness, they go, manhole, no, they're calling it a person hole, don't be ridiculous. That kind of crap.
Yeah,
right?
but
that stuff just disappears.
But
right?
that, like most of those, that was a joke that the left made about itself.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
it was, the number of times the left makes a joke about itself and then it somehow gets picked up on the right as, wow, this is the Rosetta Stone to how the left sees the world. But anyway, that's a different issue. Yeah.
Anyway, but I was going to say that a couple of things. First of all, when you're talking about the power that Republicans believed he had in the mid-90s, that's something I was going to raise, that I feel like, and I do emphasize, I'm no expert on Rush Limbaugh, but just the impression I've gotten over the years is that I do feel like Republican establishment tried to imbue his style because they felt he was so powerful.
Yes.
In a way that the left did not do with Jon Stewart. So.
Yes.
Right, because
It's true.
Yeah, I'm not saying Jon Stewart's exactly the same as
No.
Rush Limbaugh, but Jon Stewart was politics as entertainment
Yes.
for the left.
Yeah.
And there weren't a bunch of politicians trying to do snappy Jon Stewart lines.
No.
5 years after Jon Stewart, but they have completely taken on the style and language and rhythms
Yes.
of Rush Limbaugh, Republican mainstream politicians.
Yeah.
And I do think that's the reason why there's a direct line to the Palins and the Trumps
Yes.
and so forth. Oh, that's one thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that I feel like Republicans, not so much necessarily in 1987, but going back to the 60s, the hardcore conservatives felt like they were almost like an underground movement, so to speak.
Yes.
Like they were atomized, and they felt like they were dregs around America who didn't have any kind of large group to belong to. They're almost all the outsiders. You know how like on Sky News they pretend they're outsiders.
Yes.
These people on
Yeah,
cable news and sorry. And Sinecure was at the Spectator.
Yeah.
Like these back in the 60s, the conservatives felt like they were genuine outsiders.
Yes,
And
yeah.
what Limbaugh did was he created a very large group across America that they all belonged to. And that helped build the tribe.
Yes.
Now, the tribe probably existed before then, but I felt like he made the tribe grow in a big way because they felt powerful.
Yes.
They felt like they belonged to something bigger
Yeah.
in a way they might not have before.
Yeah.
And I feel like the rise of tribalism over the last 30 years can be linked to not just Rush Limbaugh, but he was the pioneer
Absolutely.
of what became the right wing, the right tribalism on the right. And the other thing I'd say is that I think a key to Rush Limbaugh, you mentioned some of the mocking AIDS victims. I mean, and we know the list. Mocking Parkinson's, Michael J. Fox, etc. Sandra Fluke, asking for a sex tape for for someone who wanted contraception coverage, etc. I feel like those moments stick out, but I don't think that's what Rush Limbaugh's major effect is. I think his major effect is that he was a pretty angry guy right from the beginning and became more angry as time went on. But unlike his imitators, unlike Michael Savage, unlike Glenn Beck, unlike all those talkback guys, basically, apart from Rush Limbaugh, he managed to do the happy warrior thing a lot better than the other guys did.
Right, yes, yeah.
Even when he was having to go at people in sometimes quite ugly ways, there was always a smirk. There was always a glint in the eye. There was always come on, can't you take a joke about it?
Yes, yeah.
And even when it hurt, he'd still go, okay, it's just a joke.
Yep.
And I feel like that was very powerful. Because until then, anger was unacceptable in politics.
Yes, absolutely.
And I felt like he made it more acceptable.
Absolutely.
By putting that face on it.
Well, now we're in an era where Tucker Carlson's lawyer can successfully argue in court that Tucker Carlson isn't responsible for things that people do after they listen to him, because who the fuck's going to take Tucker Carlson seriously, Limbaugh did create this thing of, yes, it's entirely acceptable to engage in hyperbole as a form of entertainment, even when it's violent hyperbole, So yes, and I think that he created that model of, he was able to get people to listen to him for 3 hours straight on radio, and this in Trump's tribute to Limbaugh. This is what Trump is most impressed by. So, he could just talk for 3 hours without taking callers or anything. Of course, Trump admires this. Trump just talking uninterrupted for hours on end. That's his dream life, essentially. And to this day, and especially as advertising revenue shrinks right across the media scape, which is something you can't entirely pin on the Googles and Facebooks of the world, right-wing media is more and more dependent on people who are prepared to sit there and listen or watch or stay online for hours at a time. Now, who's going to do that? You basically have to turn people into sociopaths, right? You have to turn people into people who are less connected to their families and friends, to people who believe that what they're listening to is so important and so vital that they can take massive amounts out of their life to do this and end relationships over it. It was Limbaugh who pioneered that. And, you know, as I said, and we can see this especially with QAnon now. There are a lot of stories coming out about the way that QAnon just tears families apart. That's just an extreme version of what has been going on for the last 30 years in terms of the way that right-wing media damages families.
Yeah, I was going to say that I feel like the cultish element of that side of politics extended well before Rush Limbaugh. But I do agree that he built it up.
Yes.
Do you have anything else about Limbaugh before we move on?
No.
Okay.
I think that's enough. Yeah.
Let's go into Joe Biden. And I want to start off with the biggest story of the week, which I feel was scandalously undercovered.
What was that?
It was a Newsweek scoop.
Mm-hmm. Is Newsweek still doing actual journalism?
It's
funny, not the same. It is not the same publication that it used to be.
It's funny you ask that because they're definitely not doing actual journalism with this article. Let me read you the headline. Joe Biden, playing as Luigi, wins in Mario Kart race against granddaughter at Camp David. 7 paragraphs.
Amazing.
Paragraphs.
How old's the granddaughter?
She seems. It's Naomi. She's fully grown, isn't she? Naomi.
I don't know.
I'll look it up. Yeah.
Great.
Naomi's an adult. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. So he wasn't even playing someone who's good at Mario Kart.
No. Yeah. She's Naomi's 40.
Oh,
no, she's
come
50.
on.
She's older than me.
That's his granddaughter?
Yeah. That can't be right. Oh, she must have a daughter called Naomi as well. Look.
Anyway,
point is, I've seen the Instagram video this is based on because
yes.
with something like this, you need primary sources, Dr. Dave.
Yes.
Because you don't want to take it at face value.
Was he actually playing as Luigi?
And he was playing as Luigi, and she was playing as Princess Peach, and because that's what it says in the article.
Right.
And she's an adult. Okay, so yeah,
there you go.
We'll leave it at that. But yeah, I'll put in the homework so you guys can read up on this because you don't want to miss out on the details of this article.
We're even able to post it.
this might be one of the very few articles we better if we can't post. But anyway, I just want to start off with that one.
Yes.
I want to talk briefly, very briefly, about TJ Ducklow.
Okay.
Right. And now TJ Ducklow was dating a reporter, Alexei McCammond. TJ Ducklow is in Biden's communications department. He was actually his chief spokesperson during his election campaign.
And he was a former Obama person as well, wasn't he?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe very junior. Certainly not a senior one.
Yep.
And I mocked him a couple of times last year as being particularly bad at communications.
Okay.
But anyway.
There you go, Chaz, ahead of the curve as always.
I was. Anyway, Alexei McCammond is a reporter for Axios.
Yes.
And he started dating her. Now, obviously, that's inappropriate. She was on the Biden beat. Mm-hmm. It's obviously inappropriate for his one of his communications spokespeople to date a reporter who's covering Biden. So they moved her well away onto the Kamala Harris beat.
No.
Anyway.
Well, there you go.
So you can determine whether you think that's appropriate or not from Axios' point of view. I would say not.
No.
Anyway, Politico asked him about his. They found out that he was dating Alexei McCammond. It was a bit of a secret. They asked him about it for a comment. Mm-hmm. They didn't say it was going to be a hit piece. Mm-hmm. They just who knows what piece it was. They just asked for a comment, and he replied by saying to this female reporter for Politico, "I will destroy you." Adding that he would ruin her reputation if she published this because she was jealous that an unidentified man in the past had wanted to fuck Alexei McCammond and not you. That's a quote, by the way. Wanted to fuck Alexei McCammond and not you. Ducklow then accused this woman, Tara Palmieri, accused her of being jealous of his relationship with Alexei McCammond. So then Politico...
He's the kind of idiot who watches House of Cards and thinks, that life is cool. Well, I want to be one of those guys.
Having watched this guy's work last year, I don't think he was very good at his job, to be honest. So I don't know what he's thinking. But anyway, Politico then asked the Biden administration what was going on with TJ Ducklow. and not much happened. And then 3 weeks later, Vanity Fair started writing an article about it. And then all of a sudden, he was suspended for a week. And then a whole bunch of people started saying, hang on, suspended for a week? how about this clip, Joe Biden? And then they all played the clip, which you may recall from about a month ago, just after Inauguration Day,
Yes.
when he said, if you're ever working with me and I hear you treat another colleague with disrespect, talk down to someone, I promise you I will fire you on the spot. No ifs, ands or buts. Everybody is entitled to be treated with decency and dignity. Now, admittedly, Tara Palmieri was not his colleague.
No.
But still,
that is a, yeah.
And then when it became a bit of pressure built, then he got the sack. Now, I do need to say
Yes.
that TJ Ducklow is recovering from, I believe, stage 4 cancer. Okay, so
Right.
there may be something going on there where the Biden team says, we don't want to sack a guy who's struggling a bit at the moment. But nevertheless, it does. I just wanted to raise that seemingly glaring contradiction there, but particularly I want to raise the fact that they did nothing for 3 weeks.
You wonder,
until Vanity
so
Fair
Biden
would write
Biden making that promise, like if I see you mistreating another colleague, I'll fire you on the spot. You've got to wonder how viable a promise like that is in such an inherently abusive workplace.
Yeah.
I mean, it's. And this is not unique to the Biden administration. It's not unique to the US. These kinds of, anyone who works in political roles that are very close, staffing roles that are very close to the most powerful figures in the country, they are terrible jobs to work in, where expectations are incredibly unrealistic, where blame is meted out just absolutely savagely when even minor things go wrong, where the general rule is punched down. These are inherently abusive workplaces. Like, it's never surprising when you hear just horrible stories of mistreatment coming out of these workplaces. And I'm glad that Biden made that threat, but you got to wonder if he actually followed through on it. Would everyone be fired within the first week? Yeah.
Look, to be honest, I'm not going to hold him to the word there because of exactly what you just said. It's unrealistic to expect perfect conditions in that environment, and I don't want to be one of those people who, just after we've spent 4 years of what we've just seen, to be going, you are not perfect.
No. By the way,
shame on you.
I'm also not saying that that's how it should be.
Yeah.
I think there needs to be a serious rethinking of how political workplaces operate, because I think, and we've seen it in Australia this week. Well, we see it in Australia on a weekly basis. These places are toxic, and they shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, absolutely, understood. But what I'm saying is, the reason I'm bringing this up is because quite apart from Biden's promise, let's say he never said a word, I would expect any administration, including the Trump administration, to not do nothing for 3 weeks after that happened. Yeah. And I was kind of surprised, especially a Democratic administration of any kind, which presumably they respect women. You just go, that's interesting. And I should add, by the way, the person who was, I don't know if Biden knew about it 3 weeks earlier. I doubt he did. But I'm pretty sure from what I've read that Jen Psaki, at the very least, knew about it 3 weeks ago. Yeah. So just flag it. That's all.
Yep.
More about the Biden administration. I flagged before. I want to talk about the student loan situation because this is interesting. This is unlike Joe Biden I'll play the clip and then we'll talk.
Okay, play the clip.
This is from a town hall. Sorry, it's from a town hall held on CNN earlier this week.
We need student loan forgiveness beyond the potential $10,000 your administration has proposed. We need at least a $50,000 minimum. What will you do to make that happen?
I will not make that happen. It depends on whether or not you go to a private university or a public university. It depends on the idea that I say to a community, I'm going to forgive the debt, the billions of dollars of debt for people who have gone to Harvard and Yale and Penn and schools. My children, I went to a great school, I went to a state school. But is that going to be forgiven rather than use that money to provide for early education for young children who come from disadvantaged circumstances? But here's what I think. I think everyone, and I've been proposing this for 4 years, everyone should be able to go to community college for free. For free. That costs $9 billion, and we should pay for it.
Okay, he went on from there. Now, it's unlike, I mean, Joe Biden likes saying no sometimes, but it's unlike him to be quite that blunt. And like I said, this is the first time that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has explicitly criticised him since he's been president.
Yeah.
And the left generally are not big fans of this policy. He didn't make it clear there. His policy is to forgive up to $10,000.
Yes.
Not $50,000.
Yeah.
So first of all, what's your take on that stance? And then let's talk about the policy after that.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, as you know, I'm generally against any form of means testing for any kind of welfare policy because I believe politically the only way that you actually build support for welfare policies in the long term is by making them available to everyone. But his emphasis on community colleges is a really underrated thing that Obama actually had that emphasis as well. I think Obama dedicated $12 billion to community colleges. One of the reasons that's important is because I remember one of my classmates at Michigan pointing out to me that according to educational research, when you look at the sort of biggest differences in educational attainment and in the life chances that come with it, the biggest differences are between people who've had absolutely no college and people who've had 2 years of community college. That's bigger than the gaps between people who've had 2 years of community college and 4 years of college.
That's interesting.
In terms of the life chances that they come with them. Community college is something that often gets stigmatized, as in, that's where you go when you can't get into a real college. But it's an incredibly important pathway for so many people because the reality is that not everyone has the perfectly worked out lives that allow them to go straight from high school into a 4-year college, whether it's because of financial circumstances, whether it's because of all kinds of life circumstances that make things that make that difficult, that make it an impossible pathway. So I think Biden is absolutely right about the tremendous importance of community college as a way of building up the country and as a way of improving people's lives. I do have a lot of sympathy with that. Having said that, though, I'm not on board with his dismissal of the student loan forgiveness issue.
Do you think that? Do you like the Elizabeth Warren forgiving up to $50,000, or do you think it should be Bernie Sanders style, completely forgiven?
I do not have a well thought out position on that.
That is a very wise thing to say.
Yes, I would definitely be above what Biden thinks in terms of 10,000, just because knowing people with college debt in the US, 10,000 is really pretty trivial compared to the numbers it can accumulate. But I'm not entirely sure.
Fair enough. What I would say is that on the policy, I agree, by the way, about the community colleges, although I didn't know what you said before about the difference.
Yes.
It's really interesting. Just some basic numbers, like I always do in these kinds of circumstances. Forgiving all loans would cost $1.6 trillion.
Right.
Forgiving up to $50,000 per borrower would cost $1 trillion. Forgiving up to $10,000 per borrower, like Biden wants, would cost $373 billion.
Right.
So there's a big financial difference between those three positions.
There's a huge difference in the price tag.
Yeah. And by the way, the $1.6 trillion would be more than the entire unemployment benefits for the last 20 years combined. Just a little side. Now,
but what do you make of the argument that college debt is? So aside from, okay, we're going to immediately lift people out of this burden, what do you make of the argument that college debt is a massive drag on the economy?
Look, I mean, I think I'm not going to argue with economists.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of pretty sensible economists who say that.
Yes.
And so for me, from my point of view is if you have a certain amount, now I know the MMT guys are going to go crazy when I say this, but if you have a certain pot of money to spend, in terms of the government, I'm not talking about necessarily balancing the budget. I'm talking about just you got X amount of money to spend.
Yep.
You want to get the best bang for buck out of that money in both economic outcomes and in terms of social outcomes, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I can believe that student loans are a drag on the economy. Are they, in terms of $1.6 trillion? Would spending $1.6 trillion help the economy more than any other use of $1.6 trillion? I'm not sure about that.
Right.
I'm not being euphemistic. I'm literally not sure about that.
Yeah.
But what I do know...
We're really acknowledging our own limitations today on PEP.
You inspired me. But what I do know is that socially,
Yes.
I'm not such a fan of that. Because the big price tags as far as student debt goes are not for the people who are struggling. They're for the people who went to very good universities or got very good degrees. They did 6 years at a great university. If you went to you don't have $1 million debt. All right, I would say that I don't have the numbers on me, but I've studied this before, and I know that the people who struggle to pay the debt are not the people with the big loans, because those people tend to end up being rich.
Right.
The people with the big loans usually went to good universities and have good degrees, and they end up making that money back. The people who end up being bankrupt because of student loan debt are the people with small loans from private universities that they got nothing out of.
Right. So we're talking like the University of Phoenix. We're talking the for-profit.
Yeah, we're talking
shitty for-profit universities.
I think it's called Asheville University, which when I did the War on Everything, a TV show 15 years ago, I got a degree from my dog called Sonny from Asheville University.
I remember that. Yes.
Yes. I'm talking those kinds of universities. They charge real money.
Yeah.
And it's not $100,000. It's $20,000 or $15,000, but they give you zero.
Yes, absolutely.
And then you're screwed.
Yes.
And that is the reason why, in particular, black people have a big student debt that doesn't get paid off because they don't end up earning more money as a result of their college experience.
Right.
And so that to me, the problem is not the $100,000 loans; it's the $100,000 loans that can't be paid back.
Yes.
So that's the first thing.
And that scummy for-profit sector is itself.
I'd love to close that completely
absolutely,
down.
Yes. Do it, Biden. Do it, Joe.
The next problem I have from a social point of view is that it's all very well to talk about forgiveness, but how about the cost from here on in?
Right.
Like forgiveness is just giving a break to people who are already probably in a pretty decent position. I'm worried about the people going to college next year and the year after. And do they need forgiveness in 10 years' time? I'd prefer to spend that money making college more accessible. I think that would give more bang for buck in the long run, personally. And so I prefer to see...
It's an interesting sort of moral philosophy point that you're making
Thank
there.
you.
Of yes, the lottery of you happen to have finished college before 2020, as opposed to 2030.
And I'm not even talking about the resentment thing, because Fox News would definitely go, oh, here's someone who worked hard to pay their student loan off, and then the next person got figured. I'm not even talking about that, even though that would exist.
Yes,
I'm talking about just long-term justice and bang for buck.
Yes,
etc. Anyway, and let me just give you some numbers about what I'm talking.
Give us some numbers, Jazz.
If you're going to spend some money on anyone,
yes,
these are the numbers that leap out at me. The median income of households with student loans, full stop, is $76,000.
Right,
and 7% of them are below the poverty line. Amongst those who are actually making payment on their loans, because a lot of these loans they don't even make a payment on, the median income is $86,000 and 4% are in poverty. A recent working paper from the University of Chicago, and we'll come back to them in a second because they're an interesting outfit, suggested that erasing all student loan debt would distribute $192 billion to the top 20% of earners, but just $29 billion to the bottom 20% of US households. So once again, if you're going to be giving the large S out,
right? Yes.
Surely there's a better way. I'm not talking about means testing here. I'm just saying surely there's a better way to hand it out than this. This to me seems like the kind of people who are into this tend to be people who probably are young, who just came out of college. Yes. And they'll be very much benefited by this policy. Especially forgiveness rather than cheaper college going forward. Yes. And so So
it sounds like you pretty much agree with Biden on this.
I would, like I said, I would have minimal forgiveness, 10,000 maybe. Like you, I'm not going to draw a particular line, but I'd prefer to spend that money on cheaper college going forward myself. So anyway, that's my take on that. We're just racing through here. More on Biden.
Yes.
Iran.
Yes.
Because this is an interesting area.
So, yeah, and I remember, last year we talked about, is Biden going to try to rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement? And it's looked very much over the last few weeks. Yes, he actually really does want to rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement, despite how much things got escalated between the US and Iran. It does seem that there are people on both sides who are in the mood to de-escalate.
But there's a big but, isn't there?
Well, it's still just not going to be easy, is the major point. So Iran at the moment is basically giving this ultimatum, like literally lift the sanctions by Sunday or we start the weapons program.
February 23.
Again,
Yep.
which I think it would be political. Politically, Biden would not want to be seen to be responding to an ultimatum by the Iranians. But he and Tony Blinken certainly do want to rejoin this deal. Now, you've got to think, what are they rejoining at this point? Because, the US unilaterally left in, was it 2018? Then Iran broke the terms of the deal a year later, saying, well, it's pretty meaningless now that the US has reneged. So this basically leaves the Europeans there as, the ones who have berated both the Iranians and Americans, but at the same time are the only thing holding it together.
And we should say America since then has instituted some extreme sanctions.
Yes.
Extreme sanctions to the point where they are threatening to sanction Europe for dealing with Iran in any way,
secondary
shape, or form.
sanctions.
Yeah.
Now, Biden is reversing some of those. So, reversing, for example, all these almost complete sanctions on anyone from Iran visiting the US, which, among other things, makes diplomacy very difficult. I think there does seem to be the political will to have some kind of recreation of the Iran nuclear deal. But there are going to be serious problems. There are going to be serious domestic political problems on both sides. So it was reported today that it is not clear whether the Ayatollah actually sanctions the negotiation with the US. To be fair, the Ayatollah never officially came up with a position on the original Iran nuclear deal. Iranian politics, I'm no expert on it, but it's weird and fragmented. There are a lot of different parts of the Iranian government. There are democratically elected bits. There are completely autocratic bits. The military has a major role in it. Then there's this theocratic body overseeing everything. That theocratic body, the supreme rulers, their position on the Iran nuclear deal was, we're going to let it happen, but we're not actually going to endorse it. We're never going to come to a position on it. It was known that they weren't too happy about it because they thought you can't really trust the United States. They turned out to be right in that respect. So this isn't the first time that Iran will be doing it really without the supreme leadership actually involved in it at all. It's certainly not going to be easy, but I've got to say there's actually been a lot more political will shown than I thought there would be on both sides.
What I'd add to this is that I think that it's a really I would underline what you just said about how difficult it's going to be, because there's a bit of a Gordian knot here.
Yes,
which is that Director of National Intelligence Haynes, Secretary of State Blinken, and in fact Psaki for that matter, Jen Psaki, have all said that we're a long way from re-entering the Iran nuclear deal because they need to return to the deal before we will return to the deal. Yeah, they've already gone on the record with this position. Yes, and I believe Biden has during the campaign as well.
Yeah, he did.
So they're on the record now. They can't back away from that.
Yeah.
Whereas Iran has said exactly the same thing.
Exactly,
opposite.
yes. Yeah,
Rouhani, the president, prime minister, I always get confused, leader, said, if Washington returns to Iran's 2015 nuclear deal, we will also fully respect our commitments under the pact. The ball is in the US court. Khamenei, his quote is, we've heard a lot of great words and promises which were violated and the opposite of which was carried out. This time around, it's only about action. If we see action, we too will take action. The Islamic Republic won't get convinced by words and promises like in the past. So we now have a situation where both of them are saying the other has to move first.
Yes.
That's fine. That's usual diplomacy. That happens a lot. The difference here is not February 23, which is when they're saying they're going to step up a little bit.
Yeah.
They're still 2 years away from a nuclear bomb, even according to Israel.
Yes.
Okay, so they're still...
Which, by the way, was one of the benefits of the Iran nuclear deal in the first place. It made it very difficult to restart the weapons program.
Yeah, so they're miles away from it. So there is no urgency. It's not a North Korea situation.
No.
But
But
there is an election coming up. I think it's June.
yes, there is.
And the person who takes over is not going to be Rouhani. He's finished.
Yeah.
The person who takes over is going to be responding to what has happened for the last 4 years.
Yes, yeah.
And you can bet your life they are going to be much more hardline than the administration before. Whatever they'll be like, they'll be more hardline.
Yeah.
Which means the window closes in June.
Yep.
That's a real window. That's not a bullshit window. And that's not a threatening window. That's a real window.
I feel Chaz's real window should be a segment on the podcast.
I don't feel like there'll be a lot of editions of Real Window.
Real window with Chaz.
I would like to hear the sting. Anyway, and so they've got like 3-4 months to make it happen. And both sides are not backing down.
No.
I don't think it's going to happen. Like, I mean, I hope I'm wrong. But to me, I don't see how either side retains face if they back down.
Yep.
And I think they both need to retain face. I think I don't think Joe Biden can afford politically to look like he's Iran's bitch.
No.
And Iran is pissed off of the last 4 years.
Yes, yeah.
So I think that, it's going to be tough.
Yes. Both countries handled COVID incredibly bad.
That is true. I'd like to now get on to the American Rescue Plan briefly because this is heating up a little bit. I'm going to try and race through this. There's a lot to get through. But I'll try and race through it. Just jump in whenever you will, okay?
Okay.
Where we're at the moment, 9 House committees have just passed parts of the bill last week.
Yes.
The Republicans tried to sink it with amendments, embarrassing amendments. They basically just ignored them.
Yep.
They only passed one amendment, the Democrats, which was from the Agriculture Committee about compensating farmers impacted by storms last year. So that's not bad as far as if you compare this to Obamacare.
Yeah.
They really raced through,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
It looks like it's going to be reconciliation, which is 50 votes, assuming there won't be any Republicans. There might be one or whatever.
Yep.
But and Republicans are complaining about that, as you would expect.
Yeah.
Going, they're just ramming it through. It's unfair, etc. Yeah, look, reconciliation started in 1980. It's happened 21 times since then. 4 times it was rejected by veto. It happened with welfare reform under Clinton. But more importantly, it happened for both Bush tax cuts and for the Trump tax cuts in 2017.
Yes.
And they tried to do it to get rid of Obamacare as well, but they failed. So, tough titties.
Yes.
Interestingly, helping to try and get through, the Democrats have brought back earmarks. Which is interesting. Earmarks used to be, like 15 years ago, for those who are new to American politics, earmarks were the devil.
Yes.
Right? And they made it out, the Congress people from all sides were making out like they were basically bribes.
Yes.
And to a certain extent they are. But what people... I just should explain briefly what earmarks are, because I think there's a confusion. They are not someone saying, hey, give $10,000 to the swimming pool outside my electorate office. They are... We are designating a certain amount of money to be spent for a certain purpose. This is a particular use of that money.
Yes.
So it's deficit neutral. They are not creating money for bribes.
No.
They are specifying a certain amount of money that has already been apportioned for a particular use, possibly for a bribe. But my point is, it is not a waste of money.
I remember you ranting about this on Planet America once before. Yeah. This is one of Chaz's big issues.
This is actually.
Yes.
It is, but I've been proven correct for what I'm about to get. This is why I brought it up. People act like it's a waste of money. It is not necessarily a waste of money. They were banned in 2010.
Yep.
And all they do is they allow Congress to apportion rather than the executive. The executive can do bribes as well. It's not just Congress that can do bribes.
Yep.
Having said that, they were completely out of control in terms of the number. In 2005, in the transportation bill, they had 6,300 earmarks. Right, so that's a bit crazy. But having said that, you just have rules about earmarks.
Yes, the famous Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska was one of the
most famous ones.
Which, I mean, Bridge to Nowhere is a bit unfair. It was to a community with 30 people in it.
Was that community called Nowhere? Because that would make sense then. What they actually do, earmarks, and this is the problem. This is what you need to control against, is they allow they allow the people in power in Congress to have even more power.
Yes.
Like in the last session before they got rid of earmarks, this is what I was talking about on the show when I was talking about it. 15% of Congress accounted for 61% of earmarks and 51% of all money spent on earmarks. That's the issue. So if you want to have some kind of rules about earmarks, then...
By the way, which show were you at? It was like 8 years ago.
It was a while.
Yeah.
It was a while ago.
It was
yeah.
vintage Planet America.
Anyway, so they're going to try and use earmarks to get through because Joe
Yeah.
Manchin might be a push for reasons we're going to get
Yes.
to soon. Polling, Quinnipiac, 68% support for, and by the way, 97% support from Democrats, 37% support from Republicans after they list it as a Biden rule, as a Biden bill. So even after they name check Biden,
Yes.
still 37% support from Republicans, which tells me that number isn't going to go down too much.
Yeah, I agree.
potentially. Anyway, CBS has 83% of Americans approving of Congress passing an additional economic relief package. This is the thing I like the best. Change Research polled with negative talking points. I'll read the talking points.
Yeah.
Joe Biden calls his American Rescue Plan a relief bill, but it's really just a bailout for blue states' bad lockdown policy. The best stimulus available is to smartly and safely reopen the economy, as many states have done, without having to borrow nearly $2 trillion like Biden's plan does. Okay. When you don't do the talking points, it gets 64% approval.
Yep.
When you do the talking points, it gets 56% approval.
Oh, wow.
So that's interesting.
People are fending off the bullshit.
Yeah, so that is interesting. Okay, so let's get into the details a little bit.
That, by the way, is why I don't think Ron DeSantis' prospects for actually winning an election are that great. But because that's his whole shtick.
Oh, the bullshit talking points.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. You've basically just given Ron DeSantis' stump speech there.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a $1.9 trillion top line.
Yes.
I've talked a little bit on the show, on the TV show, about output gaps.
Yep.
The CBO projection for the output gap for 2021 is $420 billion. So some go, 1.9 trillion, you might get inflation. But 1.9 trillion is over years and years and years, not
Yes.
just 1 year.
Yeah.
But still, I should say output gap sounds wonderful. I've looked through the past predictions of output gaps.
Yes.
Man, they are guesswork.
Yeah.
Like they are really all over the place.
Completely agree.
Yeah, and so I wouldn't necessarily take that to the bank. I'm not saying 1.9 trillion isn't overspending. I'm just saying output gap is not the way I would measure that.
Yeah.
And also inflation seems extremely unlikely at the moment.
Yes,
for
it
all
does.
kinds of reasons. I won't waste your time going into them now, but I doubt there'll be inflation in the next year or two. Okay, basic run through the contents. $160 billion for healthcare providers, vaccines, testing, tracing, treatment, basically COVID stuff.
Yes.
$160 billion, okay? Part of that is funding 100,000 health workers to expand the public health workforce, which is interesting.
That is
I
interesting.
think it's not a bad idea, actually, because
Yeah.
America doesn't have enough doctors. That is the reason why healthcare costs so much in America. It's not the only reason. There's a lot of reasons,
Yes.
but that is one of the hidden reasons. They don't have enough doctors. They have way few doctors. I don't have the stats on me at the moment. They have way few doctors than Europe does, and I do think that makes
Yes.
a big difference.
Yep.
$130 billion for school reopenings, which is pretty critical at the moment because I can't emphasize enough how big an issue that is going to become halfway through the year.
Yep.
So that money will help Biden a lot, I think. $50 billion for small businesses, extending the eviction moratorium to September. I'm not a big fan of that one, but I'll leave that for now. $30 billion for rental assistance
Extended
on top of that.
forever.
Yeah. I don't think if you're a landlord, you'd enjoy that very much.
Oh, no.
Extending 15% increase in food stamps to September. $40 billion subsidy for commercial daycare. Okay. Here's an interesting one. Expanding sick leave to 106 million more Americans till September. Now, do you remember we talked about the sick leave provisions last year?
Yes.
And basically, any employer with less than 50 employees was exempt. It kind of made sense, I guess, because they can't afford it. Any employer with more than 500 employees was exempt. That made no sense whatsoever.
That absolutely makes no sense.
Now, what this bill does, and I love this, is it says those who have less than 50 employees
Yes.
have to pay for sick leave and the government will reimburse them.
Okay.
That's what they should do.
Yes. Good.
Those who have more than 500 employees have to pay for sick leave and the government will say, fuck off and take that.
Good.
Which they should also do.
Yes.
Which is great.
That
I
sounds
love that.
right. We agree.
Okay. I also extend sick leave to self-employed and gig workers,
Yes.
which is also important.
Yes,
Paid
it
for
is.
by the government.
Yeah.
Again. Now, If this, however, only runs to September, so it'll be interesting to see what happens in September if they'll start to have a decent sick leave policy after that.
Yes.
Because it'll be unpopular when it goes away. And if this passes, they're talking 14 weeks sick leave, wages up to $1,400 a week or $280 a day. Okay, so that's that. Stimulus checks, $1,400 checks. Income cut off from $75,000 a single, $150,000 for a family. Where are you on the $1,400 versus $2,000 thing? Because what they're talking about is they said, $2,000 stimulus checks. In December, they passed $600 stimulus checks. So now Biden is saying, well, $1,400. That makes $2,000.
I haven't got a position on that.
Okay, that's fine. We'll move on then. My personal view is that they're both arbitrary numbers, and that isn't what's going to keep people afloat. Yeah. $1,400 and a one-off payment versus $2,000 and a one-off payment is not the difference. That's just politics.
Yes.
Unemployment benefits makes a difference. Food stamps makes a difference. They keep on going.
Yes.
Right? So personally, I don't care about that. And Biden's also extending checks. This is an interesting one to adults in the mixed immigration status households. So that is potentially a Fox News talking point down the road.
Of course it is.
Yeah. So I just flag that. You might hear that one again. Minimum wage. Raising the minimum wage from $7.25 to $15 over 5 years. They're staying with a hike to $9.50 per hour in June, and then by 2025 hitting $15. Also removing the tipped minimum wage of $2.75 an hour.
Yes.
And the sub minimum wage of $0 an hour for people who have disabilities.
Yes.
Interesting argument about whether it's wise to remove the tip minimum wage in the middle of a restaurant recession, which is where they are at the moment.
Yes, yeah.
Personally, I have sympathy for those restaurants. They're struggling a lot with COVID.
Yes, that's true.
But I would pass the legislation and I would stagger it out.
Yep.
Rather than making it straight away. I'd say over 5 years or 6 years or something like that. Because I think the tip minimum wage is rubbish.
I absolutely
But
agree.
you just need to get rid of it slowly, otherwise you'll kill the entire restaurant industry. I would say also. Now, there's all kinds of projections about what happens to minimum wage in terms of employment. A lot of people say that the stimulus alone means that you can raise the minimum wage and makes no difference to employment at all.
Yeah.
Because they spend money. With the CBO says it would reduce employment by 0.9% or 1.4 million workers, but it would boost 27 million people's wages.
Yes.
CBO, you can believe them or not believe them. They're wrong plenty of times. But I'm just throwing out the numbers there. What I would say is that with employment, that there are not every place in America is $7.25 minimum wage. In fact, very few places do. The places that do have really low cost of livings.
Yeah.
And if you just gave them $15 an hour over 5 years, that would be a big, big, big hike. And I could see potentially how that could be an issue. Once again, there's no reason why you can't raise it to $11 or $12 or stagger it over 10 years, depending on the community. There's ways of dealing with this. The answer is not necessarily to say, well, we'll just leave it at $7.25, which is what a lot of people say when you raise those kinds of issues. Biden has just flat out said he doesn't think he can get the minimum wage increase up.
He has been very fatalistic.
Which is not very good negotiating.
About this, yeah. No, if your position is, I can't do it.
Manchin has said he's open to an $11 minimum wage, but he
Yeah.
doesn't want to go over that. I personally think he's bluffing. Kirsten Sinema is not even that. She's saying, quote, what's important is whether or not it's directly related to short-term COVID relief. If it's not, I'm not going to support it in this legislation. The minimum wage provision is not appropriate for the reconciliation process. It is not a budget item and it shouldn't be in there, which is an interesting position to take.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I can see why Biden's saying he doesn't think it's possible. He doesn't think it's possible because of his own side.
Well, and also it's got to get through the parliamentarian.
Yeah.
Which is, just to very briefly explain, reconciliation needs to jump through all these hoops. To get through, you need to be a budget provision, which is specific, which is predominantly about the budget. Minimum wage, that's a bit of a tough argument to make. That's primarily about the budget rather than raising other people's wages. Also, it needs to be in the same committee as the reconciliation bill. This bill is coming through the finance committee.
Yep.
Reconciliation is in the Labor committee.
Yeah,
so
right.
that's another problem. So there's two reasons the parliamentarian will say no, and she will say no.
Yes.
But then Kamala Harris can overrule. As the vice president, she can overrule. She's the president of the Senate. She can just go, you know what? I deem it to be appropriate for reconciliation.
I deem this parliamentary.
And this is what's interesting. Then what happens is
Yes.
it takes 60 votes to overrule Kamala Harris. So Kirsten Sinema.
We've all learned a lot about Senate procedures.
Yeah,
Oh, well, no. Some of you haven't. Some of you already know all this
So
stuff.
Kirsten Sinema.
I did not know that.
Yeah, and
little
Joe
detail.
Manchin do not matter in that fun scenario. What matters then is it gets into the bill if
Yes.
they overrule, if Kamala Harris overrules, then they have a choice. Are they going to sink the entire bill over that? It's going to be yes or no. There'll be no amendments. It'll be yes or no. Is the entire COVID bill going down because you, Kirsten Sinema, because Joe Manchin will fold, because you, Kirsten Sinema, want to stand by procedure or not?
I don't think she would.
And that's going to be interesting. Now, I don't think personally Joe Biden is going to let Kamala Harris overrule the parliamentarian.
Probably not.
Mr. Norms is not going to do
No.
that. But if he does, very interesting political situation.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm looking at time there. I'm kind of
Only got 5 minutes or four.
I'm kind of 2/3 of the way through.
3.5 minutes.
You know what?
Hurry up.
You know what? Let's go to the barrier. You go, and then I'll continue on.
All right.
Okay. All right.
Have a good weekend, Peppers.
Do you have anything, Dave,
Yes.
to say for the last second squeeze, which is where we fit in anything we didn't have time to get in that we want to get in?
No, sorry. I should have thought of something, but no.
That's okay. That's all right. Okay. I will see you next week, I guess, Dave.
Yes.
And we're going to pause while I let Hand of God back in. And then he's going to sit there, and I'm going to continue. I'll just finish off this little blurb on policy, because we all love that so much, don't we? What percentage, Dave, do you reckon are going with you right now? I am going to look at the minute by minutes. See you, Dave.
See you later.
Presto, we're back, and Dr. Dave has turned into the Hand of God. We're doing proper introductions today.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
So the Hand of God, tell us about yourself. You're the Hand of God.
Yeah, that's about it.
That's it. Yeah. It's a bit more mysterious, but that's okay. Okay, I was halfway through talking about the American Rescue Plan, which is Joe Biden's COVID relief bill.
Yeah.
And going through some of the provisions that are part of it and are being negotiated right now. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're up to unemployment.
Yeah.
He's going to include $400 per week extra unemployment benefits. That is, if you recall, last year they had $600 per week extra. Trump had $300 per week extra going until basically next month.
Yeah.
They're going to extend that to September, actually August. The House Democrats are saying, and make it $400 per week extra, and that's going to continue for people who have exhausted benefits, because in America you only have unemployment benefits for a certain period of time, and then you run out. So, but this will continue for even those people who've run out.
Yeah. Right.
And also for people who wouldn't normally qualify, like contractors and freelancers. Interesting element. Oh, by the way, for those, and it's a shame Dr. Dave left because he'd love this one, because he would love just shutting down my economic rationalism when I point out that counting state unemployment benefits, total unemployment benefits for this COVID period, if this bill goes through, would exceed $1 trillion. And for comparison, in 2019, unemployment benefit payments nationwide were under $30 billion.
Yeah. Right.
So that's quite a lot more.
That is
And someone laid off in April 2020 who received average benefits until the expiration in September 2021 would receive over $51,000 in unemployment benefits in just over a year.
Good Lord.
So that's not bad living.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, and Dr. David rightly point out that there was a reason for that. It was because they can't work during COVID and all the rest of it.
Sure.
And it was great stimulus. It is great stimulus. But those are big numbers.
Yeah. That's
I'm just like, having said that, on the fictional doctor, on the empty chair of Dr. Dave's side, I will note that I was wrong about one thing, which was last year me and Dave had it out about the $600 benefit.
Yeah,
so
I remember that.
I was going,
yeah.
like, they're paying more for you to not work than for you to work.
Yeah.
The University of Chicago, which we raised earlier, which is actually the institution that made that point that I was arguing Dr. Dave about how many more people were getting paid to not work than to work. They also had a study saying that the $600 benefit boosted American spending between 2 and 2.6% and decreased employment by only 0.2 to 0.4%. And they said, quote, the job search disincentive effect is an order of magnitude smaller than would have been expected based on models calibrated to pre-pandemic behaviour. That's these guys saying, hey, the models say it should be disincentive, but it didn't turn out to be. So, you know what? I always defer to the studies. I'm one of those people. And so, so maybe all my hand-wringing is kind of bullshit. But anyway, I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one, though.
Accountability corner. That's what.
Can you do a sting for accountability corner, do you think?
Maybe.
I don't think it really trips off the tongue.
Yeah,
Accountability corner. This is an interesting one. This is another one where Dr. Dave and I would disagree. Back in May or June last year, I would have been, sure, no problems. But it would allow workers to quit their jobs if they fear they're unsafe amid the pandemic and still qualify for unemployment benefits. I reckon these days there's enough jobs that are safe that shouldn't be allowed. But having said that, sorry, jump in there.
No.
I was going to say, having said that, now I think about it, I've already changed my own mind because it's just something occurred to me. Hang on, are you saying that you can't get unemployment benefits if you quit? If you've got the shittest job in the world and you quit, you can't get unemployment benefits? That's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, let's leave aside the pandemic.
Yeah,
let's leave aside the pandemic bit. Yeah. Like, I mean, I understand that you can't, like, if you don't search for work or whatever, not getting unemployment benefits. But if you have a legitimate reason that you feel you need to quit, you should be eligible for unemployment benefits at least for a few weeks. Exactly. What's going on? Yeah. So I've actually just disagreed with myself. We don't need Dr. Dave. I just argue with myself. Okay, state and local funding. We've talked about this at length, the fact that this is one of the biggest issues with the pandemic and recessions in general, that states have balanced budgets. And during a recession, they pay out a lot more in unemployment benefits and they receive a lot less in taxes. And so then, since they have to balance their budget, they end up just cutting, firing a whole bunch of people like teachers and police officers and doctors because they just need to balance their budget somehow. And that's horrible for the recovery. This was almost the biggest issue with the 2009 recovery, that they didn't spend enough money the federal government giving money to the states. And so the states ran huge recessions. So states ran huge unemployment drives for ages. Like for years and years and years, they were sacking workers. Yeah, right. And it was a huge drag on the economy. Okay. The Biden's plan is $350 billion for state, local and territory governments. Interestingly, state revenues only fell 1.6% in fiscal year 2020 because there were so many handouts from the government, which is much smaller falling than you would expect. And they're only 3.4% lower than projected before the pandemic. So that is very small, but their expenses did go through the roof. So they need the money. Policy analysts are estimating that there'll be a $300 billion hole amongst state government in fiscal year 2022. So that's about right. That sounds reasonable. Republican counteroffer was zero. So we'll see how that goes. Obamacare is interesting. A lot of people don't realise this is in the bill. It helps Obamacare. The way Obamacare works is up to 400% of the poverty line, you get subsidies. And then after that, you get nothing, right? For your health premiums I'm talking about. Now, what they're going to do here is even for those over 400% of the poverty line, they're going to cap healthcare premiums at 8.5% of income. Anything over 8.5% of income, you get subsidised. Yep. You might go, hang on, trillionaires getting their healthcare subsidised? No, because trillionaires aren't going to spend 8.5% of $1 trillion on their healthcare premium. So it takes care of itself after you get to a certain level. But but interestingly, 2.6 million people in America are too wealthy for subsidies and are currently uninsured.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, wow.
So this would hopefully deal with them.
Yeah.
Because you would not believe how expensive some of these family premiums are. They're huge. And so especially for the people just over 400% of the poverty line, when I say 400% of the poverty line, that's like $51,000 for an individual and $106,000 for a family of four. It's not exactly, it's not zillionaires, right? Yeah. So I think that's a good policy myself.
Yeah.
Also, it would increase subsidies for those between 150 and 400% of the poverty line as well. Somewhere between 4 and 5 million people are expected to gain coverage as a result of expanding those subsidies, which is not bad for a bill which has nothing to do with healthcare.
Yeah.
But it expires after 2 years. So it will need to be renewed after 2 years. Otherwise, there'll be this big hole and people get really pissed off, which is what they're banking on.
Yeah,
exactly.
For sure.
Yeah, they're
It's
trying.
Yeah.
It's like holding a gun to a future Congress.
Oh,
going,
yeah.
extend our subsidies. Come on. Republicans do that with tax cuts.
Yeah.
So
they're just that's what, midterms or whatever.
It would be just past the midterms. But
okay.
it would be an issue
It'd be
during the midterms. Yeah. Childcare. The plan expands the child tax credit from $2,000 to $3,000 per child up to the age of 17 and $3,600 for children under the age of 6. Okay, so $3,000 for children 6 to 17, $3,600 for children under the age of 6.
Yep.
And the Centre on Budget and Policy Priorities estimates that will benefit 27 million children, which is roughly half of all Black and Latino children. That's not bad. And they'll include nearly 10 million who are currently below the poverty line. Child poverty would drop from 13.6% to 7.5%. Once again, not bad. And especially the best thing about this is that it would come as a monthly transfer, rather than at the moment the child tax credit comes as a credit at the end of the year when you pay your taxes. So which is much more realistic. Month by month, you get the payment rather than it's tax credit. Also, since the current tax credit is a tax credit, it's a bit technical, but basically you only get it if you pay that much in tax.
Yeah.
If you earn less than that, perversely, you don't get the child tax credit. So it only helps the middle class, not the lower class. Whereas this will help everyone. This is a payment for everyone who are under a certain income. Interestingly, this is less generous than the plan that Mitt Romney put out. Mitt Romney has put out child tax credit policy as well.
When you think of Mitt Romney, you think of
it's like Santa Claus.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's
Cayman Island Santa Claus.
Yes. The Biden plan, remember, was $3,000 for 6 to 17s and $3,600 to under 6s. He's got $3,000 to 6 to 17s and $4,200 for under 6s. And also, he has no income cap. The Biden income cap is $75,000 for a single, or $150,000 for a family. Romney has no income cap. He'll claw it back eventually in taxes, he says. And he'll pay. His is deficit neutral. He's going to pay for it with a bunch of minor tax credits and TANF, which is basically welfare, but it's changed to what it used to be. Like welfare these days in America is not like you think welfare is. What it is a block grant to states based on the population of that state like 20 years ago, which is a bit weird. So then fast-growing states get less and less and less and less.
Yeah, right.
And like Texas, for instance, and slow-growing states get comparatively, more compared to Texas. And it's also a slush fund. You don't have to spend on welfare. So what they do is they take this block grant and they just spend on whatever they like.
Ew.
So you get these places like Louisiana where they spend like 4% of their welfare, the TANF, on actual welfare recipients, which is bullshit.
Yeah. Totally.
So anyway, so getting rid of that,
especially
I don't think
for a state like Louisiana,
exactly
it's such a struggle.
Yeah, that's why it's so poor.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason.
Sure.
So that's not a bad one to get rid of in terms of deficit neutrality, I think, especially when you're handing out a much more generous plan, which Mitt Romney is doing here. Also getting rid of SALT. Do you remember briefly with the tax?
Salt Bay.
No. Do you remember
Salt Bay?
The state and local taxes for property it's talking about, where how in blue states, they used to give you a tax credit for the property taxes you pay for the property taxes you pay, and some other taxes I think on your federal tax.
Yep.
It's like a tax credit for the taxes you paid locally.
Yep.
You don't pay federally.
Yep.
Which is a huge handout for blue states where people pay high taxes, especially with the case of the property taxes, New York especially New York, which has very high property taxes, right? Because property is expensive.
Yeah.
So basically, it's one of those rare, well, not rare, but it's one of those instances where the Democrats are actually helping the rich.
Yeah, no, we
have talked about this before. We talked about this last year.
Yeah.
Mitt Romney wants to get rid of that.
Mitt.
And the Democrats, we'll see how they go on that one.
Right.
But anyway, Mitt Romney, his plan is deficit neutral. Biden's is not. Whatever. It's just interesting. Mitt Romney has his own plan there, which was more generous. Anyway, so that's basically, I've just gone through briefly everything that's in the the American Rescue Plan. And this is going through the House at the moment, and we'll see how that goes. So just thought I'd explain for once, because usually when you hear about this, you only hear about the highlights.
Yep.
And you never get the details. So I hope you enjoyed those details,
What were your
guys.
thoughts overall then? Sorry, I missed the first one.
Look, I think that there's things that I don't like about it, but I think largely it's pretty good. I think there's a lot more good stuff there than bad stuff.
Yeah.
And I'd fine tune a bit of it, but yeah, I think it will get through, probably without the minimum wage increase. Without.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right,
But I think it will get through, and I think that it's going to help both Americans, and it will help Joe Biden, which that's probably a win for Joe Biden. Little stat nugget. Poll from Morning Consult. I'm going to get into the executive orders. Now we're doing policy. Mm-hmm. Have we got the policy corner?
No, I've just got
done?
the one so far.
Okay, that's right. Okay,
Yeah.
all right. We'll get to that.
That's the next week. Joe.
Okay, well, we're going to talk about executive orders soon. And I saw an interesting poll about executive orders. Which do you think, there's only one executive order that's been polled that has a net negative approval, according to Morning Consult. They're all very popular. This one has an approval of 39%, this particular executive order, and a disapproval of 48%. What do you think that executive order is? Now, I know you don't know every... There's one where Dave needed to be there. Sorry, hand of God.
I got no idea.
Just pretend Dave got it wrong. He bumbled and he really dropped the ball. Expanding the refugee cap by 110,000 people in the upcoming fiscal year.
Yeah, right.
Americans hate refugees.
They're off that, yeah.
They have changed so much. America used to be all about refugees, and it is so not anymore. They are scared, and it is depressing.
Yeah.
But anyway, apart from that, all the executive orders are really popular. I'll go through them over the next few weeks. Look at the homework. I'm going to put a few random links there for you guys. One I actually put on the Facebook page already, but I'm going to put it in the homework for those who don't follow our Facebook page. And you should. It's about different ways of
Well,
reforming.
they should now because we're the only one.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now they have to.
Yeah, quote unquote news.
Literally, we're the only site on Facebook in the world.
Yeah. I think that's how it runs.
Yeah, I think that's how it goes. Yeah. It's an article detailing ways of reforming the filibuster without getting rid of it.
Yeah.
And it sounds really boring. It's not. It's a really interesting article. I would recommend, for once, that you go into the blurb.
Who wrote it? Too?
It's from Ian Millhiser.
Okay.
He's a legal writer for Vox.
All right.
I don't normally do this, but I would recommend you look in the blurb for the homework. If you are all interested in the filibuster, it's very technical, but it's actually really interesting. And I also am almost certain they're going to implement some of these reforms. Yeah. And it's so you heard it here
I'll be
first.
doing the homework.
You should.
Yeah.
And also, I've got an article there about just a random. There's a guy called Kevin Drum who's a blogger who I really like, who's currently got serious cancer problems, but which is a shame. It's a shame that anyone gets cancer, but he's a particularly good writer. He's great data. I use a lot of his graphs on the show. Right. He's really, really good, and I'm going to miss him if he stops blogging. Never mind the fact he's a human being. I don't want to die. But anyway, he's really good. Anyway, he's done an interesting little, it's just a little digester of about black kids performing 3 grades lower than white kids in school, and that's been consistent for decades. And what he's noticed is that does translate somewhat to income levels. And it also translates to unemployment levels. Anyway, I'll let him explain because I don't want to spend the time doing it now because we're way over time. Yeah. But just if you're interested, it's an interesting observation he's made, which is not perfect, but it's worth remembering, I feel.
Yeah, cool.
If you're interested in inequality, racial inequality, I think it's an interesting observation. So have a look at the homework there. Last second squeeze. This is where you come in.
Yeah.
Hand of God.
Because
It's the
Because you are the last
second
second squeeze.
squeeze.
I don't even know how this goes.
I can't remember. I only had it once. But
Okay. Dance like a dickhead.
Yeah.
Last second squeeze.
Yeah.
Hand of God, go for it.
So I did the explainer package this week on Victor Berger, and
Hand of God is one of our editors.
yeah, and so there was no footage of him. I had to make a 5.5 minute package without any footage of the bloke.
Sure.
And and so John segues his package because I just get a script and then I just make however I want to. And so he cuts to it. He's like, well, there's something we got to, like, you know, this story doesn't end properly here. It's not a happy end for Victor Berger. You know, he dies. And I just thought I'd try and animate Victor Berger's moment.
Oh, you showed us his death in your imagination.
Yeah.
Okay, so why is this not in the package?
Well, they got cut from the show.
It got cut from the show. Did the package get cut from the show?
The package didn't get cut from the show.
But just your bit.
My bit.
How
yeah.
long did you toil over this bit?
I don't want to talk about it, but yeah, it was. I essentially learned After Effects so I could do this stuff.
Really?
Yeah.
So you didn't get our very qualified graphics artist to do this. You just went and did it yourself.
Well, I worked on this one with Steve. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
yeah.
yeah.
So just
and I'm going to play it.
yeah.
for
So
the
just to
people.
summarise.
Yeah.
Since this is never going to air anywhere else.
Yeah.
Probably because it's inappropriate. I'm assuming.
Well, it depends. He died like nearly 100 years ago.
Sure. Okay. All right. Okay. Its time has come.
I mean, and that's the thing. That's what I said. I'm like, well, if we've gone this whole time, 5.5 minutes without making fun of his name, Burger, like,
Yeah.
I reckon I can have a bit of a fun with his death.
Tragedy plus time equals comedy. That's what they say.
Exactly.
100 years. That's
Yeah.
lots of time. That's lots of
Exactly.
comedy. Okay. So since it's entirely inappropriate to play this on the news channel.
Yeah.
We are now going to, and the ABC doesn't take any ownership of this podcast
They do
whatsoever.
not.
In
They
fact,
do
they
not.
want nothing to do with this podcast.
Seems that way.
Therefore, this is the perfect place to share it with a few thousand people.
Should we finish the show on that?
I
or-
think we should.
Yeah, all
Okay.
right.
All right. Well, let's leave you with
Victor Berger.
With Victor Berger's untimely demise, courtesy of One Hand of God. We'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
I'd like to say this story has a happy ending there, but there was one last twist for Victor Berger. He was hit by a tram crossing the road in front of his Milwaukee newspaper office in 1929. He suffered a fractured skull and died a few weeks later.